Welcome to episode 28 of Dark Academia Queen. Today we continue on with our haunted history of Salem, Massachusetts. Um, we're gonna start off with the legacy of the East Indies, and by the time I'm gonna talk a lot more about the Salem witch trials to get a lot more in depth about it. But if you're new, before I do that, if you're new here, hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications. Also subscribe. Also, if you live in Salem, I would like to know, like, could you really tell, like, the haunted history and everything? It is on my travel bucket list of places, and I think it would be pretty awesome to go and visit. But, let's go on to the legacy of the East Indies and the old China trade. So the old China trade left a significant mark in two historic districts: Chestnut Street District, part of the Samuel McIntyre Historic District, containing 407 buildings in the Salem Maritime National Historic Museum, and it comprised of 12 historical structures in about 9 acres of land along the waterfront of Salem. Elias Haskett Derby was among the wealthiest and most celebrated of the post-revolutionary merchants in Salem. Derby was also the owner of the Grand Turk and the first New England vessel to trade with China, and the second after the Empress of China to sail from the U.S. Thomas H. Perkins, with his supercargo, established a long ties with the Chinese and garnered the Forbes fortune throughout the illegal opium sales. Now, Salem was incorporated as a city on March 3rd, 1836, and adopted a city seal in 1839 with the motto Divitis Indi Uesc ad Ultimum Sinem. Basically, it is Latin for to the rich East Indies until the last slab. Now, Nathaniel Hawthorne was actually an overseer of Salem's port from 1846 until 1849, and he worked at the U.S. Custom House across the street from the port near Pickering Wharf and his setting for the beginning of the Scarlet Letter. In 1858, an amusement park was established at Jennifer Point, a peninsula jutting inside the coast. Prosperity left the city with a wealth in a fine architecture, including a federal-style mansion that was designed by one of America's first architects, Samuel McIntyre. Now, for whom the city's largest historic district is named. And the homes and mansions now make up the great concentration of the notable pre-1990s domestic structure in the U.S. While I'm on Salem, let me just say something real quick. Salem Hocus Pocus is my favorite movie. There, I said it. Hocus Pocus 2 disappointed me. I'm sorry, but it did. I had such high hopes for it and it just disappointed me. But anyway, back to the episode. Shipping declined throughout the 19th century, and Boston and New York City eclipsed Salem as silting harbor. Consequently, as the city turned to manufacturing industries, also turned into included tanneries, shoe factories, Nockenberg Steam Cotton Company. The Great Salem Fire in 1914 also destroyed 400 homes, left 3,500 families homeless, but spared the historic concentration of federal architecture on Chestnut Street. A memorial plaque on a drugstore marks the former site of the corn leather factory, which burned in the fire. Now, let's talk about the Salem witch trials. We all know it. It's a dark part in U.S. history, particularly in the Salem history. And it's something we need to talk about because this was started out of boredom and jealousy. And at this time, you could just say, "Oh, that person stole my dog." They're a witch and stuff like that. So this was an unnecessary time in history that started because of teenage boredom, pure petty and pure jealousy, immature adults. But so, Salem witch trials were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts between February 1692 and 1693, and more than 200 people were accused. 30 people were found guilty, 19 of whom were executed by hanging, 14 women, 5 men. One man, Giles Corey, died under the torture after refusing to enter a plea, and at least 5 people died in jail. Um, Arrests were made. So Arrests were made in numerous towns in Salem and Salem Village, which is known today as Danvers, notably Andover and Topsfield, and the grand juries and the trial for the capital crime were conducted by Court O'Yara, terminated in 1692 by a Superior Court of Judicature in 1693, both held in Salem town. Now, and where the hangings took place, it was the deadliest hunt for history in the hunt of the history of the colonial United States. 14 other women and 2 men were executed in Massachusetts and Connecticut during the 18th century. This episode is one of colonial America's notorious cases of mass hysteria, next to toilet paper hysteria. It was not unique, but it was a colonial manifestation of the broader phenomenon of witch trials in the early modern period, which took the lives of tens of thousands, mainly in Protestant Europe, in the Americas. In America, Salem's events have been used as a political rhetoric and political literature in a vivid cautionary tale of the dangers of isolationism, religious extremism, false accusations, and the lapse in due process. Many historians consider the lasting effects of the trials to have been highly influential in the history of the U.S. And according to the historian George Lincoln Burr, the Salem witch trials were the rock for which the theocracy shattered. Now, at the 300th anniversary events in 1992, to commemorate the victims of the trial, a park was dedicated to Salem and a memorial in Danvers. In 1957, an act passed by a Massachusetts legislature absolved 6 people, while one passed in 2001 absolved 5 victims. And as of 2004, there was still talk about exonerating all the victims. As they should exonerate them, they were innocent. Like I said, this was a case that started because of teenage boredom, pettiness, jealousy, immature adults who was like, oh my gosh, let's do this and that, right? And we can't say it was a product of the time. Teenage boredom and all of this is still, and everything I just said is still in today's world. Um, Fortunately, there has not been anybody being accused of being a witch that I know of. But today we have more common sense to realize that witches don't exist. But we have more common sense to realize that we can't call this mass hysteria is not necessary. Now, I think after the 2020 toilet paper mass hysteria, I think we can understand that, right? But anyway, though some of the victims that happened in the 18th century as the Massachusetts colonial legislature was asked to reverse the attainders of George Burroughs and others, in January 2016, the University of Virginia announced its Gallows Hills project team has determined the execution site of Salem where the 19, quote, witches, unquote, had been hanged. The city dedicated the Proctor Ledge Memorial to the victims there in 2017. So let's dive into some background, okay? So while the witch trials had began to fade out across much of Europe by mid-17th century, they continued to fringes in Europe and the American colonies. The events in 1692 and 1693 in Salem became a brief outburst of sort of hysteria in the New World. While the practices were already reigning in most of Europe, in 1668, against modern citizens, Joseph Glanville claimed that he could prove the existence of witches and ghosts of the supernatural, as he wrote, the denial of bodily resurrection and the supernatural spirits. In the treatise, Glanville claimed that ingenuous men should believe in witches and apparitions if they double the reality of the spirits. They also not only denied demons, but also the Almighty God, and Glanville wanted to prove that the supernatural could be denied. Those who did deny apparitions were considered heretics, but for it also disproved their belief in angels. Works for men such as Glanville and Colton Mather, as they tried to prove that demons were still alive. So, the trials would begin by a few local women who were accused of witchcraft by four young girls, believe it or not. Betty Paris, who was 9, Abigail Williams, who was 11, Ann Putnam, who was 12, and Elizabeth Herbert, who was 17. Um, Now, these accusations centered around the concept of affliction, and with the witches accused of having caused physical and mental harm to the girls through witchcraft. And the earliest record of witchcraft execution was of the Alice Young in 1647 in Hartford, Connecticut. The start of the Connecticut witch trials, which lasted until 1663, and historian Clarence S. Jewett included a list of people executed in New England in his 1881 book. So, New England had been settled by religious dissenters seeking to build a Bible based society according to their chosen discipline. The original 1629 charter of the Massachusetts Bay Colony was vacated in 1684, after which King James II installed Sir Edmund Andros as the governor of the Dominion New England, and was ousted in 1689 after the Glorious Revolution. And they replaced the Catholic King James II with Protestant rulers William and Mary. So, oh my gosh! So speaking of that, I actually watched a video on that where it talked about a lot of it. I do recommend going, and I'll try to find it again. But it talked about the life of them and eventually Queen Anne. So, but yeah. But Simon Bradstreet and Thomas Danforth, the colony's first leaders under the old charter, assumed their posts as governor and deputy governor, but lacked constitutional authority to rule because the old charter had been vacated. At the same time, tensions erupted between English colonists settling in the eastward and the French-supported Wabanaki people of the territory that became known as King William's War. This was 13 years after the devastating King Philip's War, with the Wampanoag and the other indigenous people in the southern and western New England. In October 1690, Sir William Phillips led an unsuccessful attack on the French-held Quebec. Between 1689 and 1692, Native Americans continued to attack many English settlements along the Maine coast, leading to the abandonment of some of these settlements and resulting in flood of refugees into areas like Essex County. Now, a new charter for the enlarged province of Massachusetts was given final approval in England on October 16, 1691. Increased Matter had been working on attaining the charter for 4 years with William Phelps, often joining him in London and helping him gain entry into Watchell. Mather has published a book on witchcraft in 1684, and his son Cotton Mather published one in 1689. So Mather would buy out one of London's editions of his son's book, in 1690. An increased Mather were claimed to have picked all the men to be in the new government. News of Mather's charter and the appointment of Phelps as the new governor had reached Boston by late January, and a copy of the new charter reached Boston February 8, 1692. Phelps would arrive in Boston May 14th and was sworn in by the governor 2 days later, along with the lieutenant governor William Dalton. One of the orders of the business and council was May 27, 1692, and was a formal nomination of the county justice of the peace, sheriff, and commissioned by the special court of Ower and Terminer to handle the large numbers of people who were thronging the jails. Now, Salem Village was known for its factious population, whom many had disputes internally with the Salem town, and arguments about the property lines, gays and rights, and the church privileges were rife, and neighbors considered the population quarrelsome. In 1672, the villagers had voted to hire a minister of their own apart from Salem town. The first two ministers, James Bailey and George Burroughs, stayed only a few years each. The party and the congregation failed to pay the full rate. Despite the minister's rights being upheld in the general court and the parish being admonished, each of the two ministers chose to leave, and the third minister, Didat Lawson, stayed for a short time. Leaving him in the church of Salem, refused to ordain him, and therefore, not over the issues of the congregation, the parish disagreed about Salem's village choice as Samuel Parish, as it is the first ordained minister. On June 18, 1689, the villagers agreed to hire Paris for 66 euros annually. Now, is it euros or pounds at this time? I want to say this is still euros. This is pounds. Yeah. So 66 pounds. And used one of the parsonage. So on October 10, 1689, however, they raised the benefits, voting that they grant him the deed to the parsonage and the 2 acres, and this conflicted with the 1681 village resolution, which stated it shall be lawful of the inhabitants of the village to convey the houses and lands belonging to the ministry and persons not any cause to vote that way. Now, through the prior minister's faith and level of contention of Salem Village were valid reasons for caution accepting the position. Reverend Parris increased the village's division by delaying his acceptance, and he did not seem able to settle the new parishioners' dispute. Now, prior to the constitutional turmoil in the 1860s, the 1680s, the Massachusetts government had been dominated by conservative Puritans leaders. While Puritan and the Church of England both shared a common influence of Calvinism, Puritans have oppressed many of the traditions of the Church of England, including the Book of the Common Prayer, the use of clergy residence during the services, the use of the sign of the cross at baptism, and the kneeling to receive communion, all of which they believed was constituted propriety. King Charles I was hostile to this viewpoint, and the Anglican Church officials tried to repress dissenting views during the 1620s and 1630s. Some Puritans and other religious minorities had sought refuge in the Netherlands, but ultimately many migrated to the colonies to establish their own society. And these immigrants, who were mostly constituted by families, established several of the earliest colonies in the U.S. Um, I say U.S., but it was still the colonies at this time. But um, colonies in New England, of which is now Massachusetts Bay Colony, which was the largest and most economically important, and is intended to build a society based on religious beliefs. Colonial leaders were elected by the freemen of the colony, and those individuals who had their religious experience formally examined and had been admitted to one of the colony's Puritan congregations. The colonial leadership was prominent members of the congregations and regularly consulted in the local minister and on the issues facing the colony. In the 1640s, England was erupted in civil war. Can we remember this one? Does anybody else remember this? Yep, you probably know what I'm talking about. Oliver Cromwell. He might be He might be my first down the rabbit hole episode. We never know. But the Puritan-dominated parliamentarians emerged victoriously, with the crown was supplanted by the protectorate of Oliver Cromwell in 1653. Its failure led to restoration of the old order under Charles II. Immigration of New England slowed significantly in these years. In Massachusetts, a successful merchant class began to develop that was less religiously and motivated by the colony's earliest settlers. What about the gender roles in this time now? Well, a majority of people were convicted of witchcraft who were women, and overall, the Puritan belief in prevailing New England culture was inherently sinful. That women were inherently sinful, more susceptible to damnation than men were, and throughout their daily lives, Puritans, especially Puritan women, actively attempted to thwart them attempts by the devil to overtake their souls. Indeed, Puritans held the belief that men and women were equal in the eyes of God, but not the eyes of the devil. Women's souls were seen as unprotected in the so called weak and vulnerable bodies. Several factors may include why women were less likely to admit guilt or shame of the witchcraft than men. Historian Elizabeth Rice asserts that some likely believe that they had been given into the devil, and others might believe that they had done so temporarily. However, because those who confess reintegrate themselves in society, some women might have confessed in order to spare their own lives. Quarrels with neighbors often incited witchcraft allegations. One example is Abigail Faulkner, one that she's in relation to William Faulkner, who was accused in 1692, and Faulkner admitted that she was angry at what folks said, and the devil may be temporarily overtaken her, causing harm to her neighbors. Women who did not conform to the norms of the Puritan society were more likely to be the target of an accusation, um, especially those who were unmarried and did not have children. So, what about the witchcraft publicizing? Well, Cotton Mather was a minister of Boston's North Church, prolific publisher of pamphlets, including some that expressed a belief in the witchcraft. In his books, Memorable Providence relating to witchcraft and possessions, Masters described him as an oracular observation and how stupendous witchcraft had affected his book in the Boston Mace of John Goodwin. Matter illustrates the Goodwin's oldest child and had been tempted by the devil, stolen linen from the washerwoman Goody Clover, and Clover, with an Irish Catholic descent, was characterized by a disagreeable old woman who described her husband as a witch. And this may had been why she was accused of casting spells on the Goodwin children. After the event, 4 of the 6 Goodwin children began to have strange fits, and some people refer to them as the disease of astonishment. And the manifestations erupted into disease. Attributed to the disease quickly and became associated with witchcraft. Symptoms included neck and back pain, tongues being drawn from their throats, and the large sounds of random outcries. What about the aftermath now? Well, although the witch trials last was held in May 1693, public response to the event continued. In the decades following the trials, survivors and family members sought to establish the innocence of the individual who were convicted and to gain compensation in the following centuries. The descendants of those unjustly accused and condemned were sought to honor their memories. Events in Salem and Danvers in 1992 were used to commemorate the trials. In November 2001, years after the celebration of 300th celebration anniversary of the trials, the Massachusetts legislature passed the act exonerating all victims who had been convicted and naming all as innocent, with the exception of Elizabeth Johnson, who was cleared by Massachusetts Senate on May 26, 2022. The last conviction to be reversed, and after pressure from school children who discovered the anomaly, the trials have figured to be in American culture and have been explored in numerous works in arts and literature. Um, Now, what about the memorials? Well, Rebecca Nurse's descendants erected a obelisk obelisk shaped Granville Monument of the memory in 1885. and the grounds of the Nurse Homestead in Danvers with the inscription of the John Greenleaf Whittier. In 1892, an additional monument was erected in honor of the 40 neighbors who signed a petition in support of the nurse. Now, there are many medical theories associated with this. The cause of the symptoms of claimed to be afflictions continue of interest. Some say psychological explanations, and many explore psychological hysteria in response to Indian attacks as well. So, now I want to take a minute and talk about some of Salem's most haunted places to visit: the Salem Witch House, Proctor's Ledge, Howard Street Cemetery, Old Salem Jail, the House of Seven Gables, the Pickman House, which is considered to be one of many of the most haunted in the town, the Joshua Ward House, Rockefellers, the Haunted Merchant, the Haunted Ropes Mansion, Gallows Hill, Old Town Hall, the Salem Inn, the Ghost of Bunghole Liquors, the Ghost of Grinshaw House, Wicked Good Books. Okay, that is it for this episode. Join me at next time as we talk about the interesting life of Emily Bronte. I will be going over to Europe to talk about some of those, but I would eventually be making my way back to America. All right, y'all have a great day.